Okay, if you have your Bible, if you want to turn them with me to the book of Genesis, chapter 17. And firstly, I'd like to say Happy Mother's Day to every mother, to every wife present here this morning, and to every mother or wife watching online. The title of my message is The Grace of God for an Imperfect Family. The grace of God for an imperfect family. Genesis 17 and verse number 15 says, "And God said unto Abraham, As for Sarai thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall her name be. And I will bless her, and give thee a son also of her. Yea, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her." Let's bow our heads and pray. Father, we thank you for this wonderful book. We thank you so much for our mothers, Lord. I pray that you may speak to every heart here this morning, as mothers, as fathers, as children, and help us to look to you, Lord, appreciating the grace of God upon our lives every day of our lives. Talk to every heart here this morning as a speaker and as listeners. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. It has been said that motherhood is the oldest occupation in the world. You and I would not be here without our mothers. By the way, we have been celebrating Mother's Day for just over 100 years now. It all started with a lady by the name of Anna Jarvis, who took the initiative to celebrate Mother's Day in a worship service in the United States of America. And later regretted it when she realized that that day has become so commercialized. It's also been said that mother's love sets the standards. When you talk about the different degrees of love, you don't get higher than the mother's love. Sorry about that. Are we okay now? Are we okay, Pastor? Can you hear me? Is that okay? Beautiful. Okay. But when it comes to the Bible tells us in the book of Isaiah, chapter 49, can a woman forget her sucking child, that she should not have compassion on the son of her womb? Is that possible? Is that possible that a mother could forget her breastfeeding baby? And he goes on and says, "Yea, they may forget. Yet will I not forget thee. Behold, I have graven thee on the palms of my hands. Thy woes are continually before me." Somebody said, when you're at age 4, you think mom knows or can do anything. By the time you're 12, you're thinking mom doesn't know everything. By the time you're 18, you're saying mom is so out of step with time that she's so much backwards. At age 25, you're saying, well, mom knows few things. At age 35, you're saying, before we decide, let's get mom's opinion. At age 45, you're saying, I wonder what mum would be saying about this. And at age 60, you're saying, I wish I can talk to my mum one more time. Isn't it crazy that when you have your own children, you suddenly realize how appreciative you are of the parents that raised you up? And you want to thank them, and you want to call them and tell them thank you so much for putting up so much patience with me growing up. There was a mum pushing her trolley in the supermarket, and her little girl in the trolley screaming the entire time. And the mother was saying out loud, now calm down, Ellen. It will be all right, Ellen. It's almost time to go home, Ellen. And one of the workers looked at her and says, ma'am, you ought to be congratulated with the amount of patience you're showing with little Ellen. The mother looked at her and said, lady, I am Ellen. But you know what? By the time you're grandparents, it'll be all worth it. I want to quote somebody who's, I'm not going to say a name, but someone who I really love said to me, if I knew grandkids are so wonderful, I would have skipped my kids. So it'll be all worth it when you're grandparents. But this morning, let me tell you, if you're wise this morning, you would give your mum the respect and the honor that she deserves. I want you to see what the wisest man that ever lived, besides the Lord Jesus Christ, did. In 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 19, it says, and Bathsheba therefore went unto King Solomon to speak unto him, that's her son, by the way, concerning Adonijah. And the king rose up to meet her, and bowed himself unto her, and sat down at his throne, and caused the seat to be set next to the king's mother, and she sat on his right hand. Now this mother came to her son, and he's the king. Now we all remember who Bathsheba is. She's the woman that King David had an affair with. And Solomon was the king at that time, and she came into his throne to ask him for a favor. He came down from the throne, and he grabbed the seat, put it next to him, and he set her right next to the king. You know what that tells me? Although we're not deserving, but God's grace is always on our lives, and He puts us right next to the king. If you're wise, you would give your mum the honor that she deserves. This is the first year we spend Mother's Day without my mum. But mothers will always be mothers. You know, I was watching Danny and Alex, and I just remembered some of the stuff. When it's really raining heavy, I get a call from my mum all the time. How are you doing in this rain? Take care. Don't be too wet. I said, Mum, I'm 60 years old. But mums will always be mums. And we need to appreciate our mothers. The grace of God is always much greater than anything in our lives. The Apostle Paul tells us, by grace are ye saved. I want to talk to you this morning about one of the most famous families in the Bible. One of the most famous mothers in the Bible. Her name is Sarah. Her husband's name is Abraham. He was the father of the Jewish nation. He was the father of all believers. And in Matthew chapter 1 verse 1, it says, the book of generations of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Out of his descendants came the Lord Jesus Christ. Yet this family was an imperfect family. But the grace of God was upon it. It was an imperfect family with the grace of God upon it. Firstly, we want to talk about, he was an imperfect husband. He was an imperfect husband. The Bible tells us in Genesis chapter 12, I don't want to keep referring to the references, I'll just say it, and trust me, it's there in the Bible. I just want to save time because I've only got 25 minutes, I was told. So the Bible tells us in the book of Genesis chapter 12, there was famine in the land. And Abraham went down to Egypt, and he took Sarah with him. And when they got to Egypt, he says to Sarah, now you're a gorgeous woman to look upon. Please, don't say that you're my wife or I'm your husband. Say that I'm your sister. Please, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. What a great plan. And you know what? When they got to Egypt, they realized she was a beautiful woman. But Abraham never ever expected that his wife was going to be kidnapped from him and taken to Pharaoh. He's got a lot of possessions now. He's got a lot of sheep. He's got a lot of oxen, a lot of camels, a lot of men servants, a lot of maid servants. But let me ask you a question. What is the use of having all these possessions and losing the one whom you love the most? And that's exactly what happened in the life of Abraham. He's got a lot of possessions now, but he lost his wife. Can you imagine with me? She's at Pharaoh's house, and he's there by himself. But the grace of God was upon his life. You say, how? The Bible tells us that God plagued Pharaoh and his house because of Sarah. And then Pharaoh came to Abraham and said, what have you done? Why did you not say that it was your wife? But God kept her safe. He says to Abraham, take your wife, take your possessions, and go out of here. He was an imperfect husband. But the grace of God was upon his life. Can you imagine with me as they were leaving Pharaoh's house, Abraham and Sarah with all the possessions? Now the meaning of Sarah is princess. And the meaning of Sarai, some of the commentators say, it has a meaning of a quarrelsome or feisty. So in other words, she was a feisty princess. Do you have any of them at home? I used to have one. I'm not going to say which one, so I'll leave you guessing. She was a feisty princess. Now, the Bible doesn't say that. But can you imagine as they were leaving Pharaoh's house, and Sarah looks at Abraham and says, That plan of yours, honey, it was amazing, Habibi. It was really good. I don't think she would have said something like that. She might have said something like, you've almost made me a sex slave in Pharaoh's house. You almost ruined our lives because of the lie you asked me to say. But God's grace was upon their lives. And He kept them safe at that time. An imperfect husband. Not only an imperfect husband, there was an imperfect mother or wife. Now God appeared to Abraham and said to him, unto thy seed I will give this land. Now Abraham was about 75 years old and Sarah was about 65 years old. Sarah waited 11 years. And after 11 years, she decided it's time for God's promise to be fulfilled. And she said, I can't wait any longer than that. I want to do what God couldn't do. So she said to Abraham, I want you to go in and have a baby with my maid Hagar. Which again, an imperfect husband said, sure, I'll do it. You want me to do it? I'll do it. And they had a baby, and they called his name Ishmael. Sarah could not wait because she wanted a baby so bad. Sarah did the wrong thing because she wanted something so bad. Listen to me, please. Every time you want something so bad that you're willing to disobey God to get it, that something becomes an idol in your life. I should not be seeking anything in my life other than God or Christ Himself. He is my satisfaction and He is all that I need. Sarah was an imperfect wife and a mother. W.A. Tozer said this, made this statement which I really like. He says, thou dost seek us, though thou does not need us. We seek thee because we need thee. For in thee we live and move and have our being. We seek God because we need Him. And in fact, He is all we need in our lives. We went for a short holiday to Queensland not long ago, and we took my daughter Becky and the grandson. And while we were there in Queensland, my grandson caught hand, foot, and mouth disease. And apparently it's very painful, and he was crying. And it got to a stage where he was just attached to his mum and he would not go to anyone. I'll try and take him, or his grandma tried to take him. He doesn't want it. All he wanted is just to cling to his mother, and he didn't want to go anywhere. You know what he was saying? He's saying, all I need is my mom. Anything that satisfies me at this time is my mom. I don't want anyone else except my mom. Let me ask you a question. Is God your satisfaction in your life? Listen what the Bible says in Psalm 131. Psalm 131. It says, surely I have behaved verse number 2. Surely I have behaved and quieted myself as a child that is weaned of his mother. My soul is even as a weaned child. You know what he's saying here? He said, the same way a child is weaned of his mother. You know when a child is hungry? When a baby is hungry, you get him close to his mother and he will be screaming on the top of his lungs because he wants to eat. But when he's weaned out of his mother, he can stay right next to her in her bosom and he'll be satisfied. Why? Because he's weaned off her breast now. He is satisfied. And what we need to experience in our life is full satisfaction in God and nothing else. Sarah did not do that in her life. She wanted to do her own thing and get the child that she was looking forward to. But we see the grace of God in her life. Although Abraham wronged her, although she did the wrong thing by her and he asked her to lie. Do you know what the Bible tells us in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 6? It says, even as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, small l, or my master. She learned to obey God and trust God later on, as we will see. You know, I was 11 years old when my dad decided to leave and come to Australia. And I still remember now, I came from school and my mum told me, go and say goodbye to your dad, he's leaving. I said, where is he leaving? She said, he's leaving to Australia. I said, okay. And he left for 6 years. For 6 years, he was in Australia and we were in Lebanon. My dad wronged my mum in so many different ways and asked for forgiveness. And God changed his life in a miraculous way. But you know what? Not once I heard my mum saying anything in a direct or indirect way to say anything about my dad and what he did. She has forgiven him completely, and he realized that. And she started obeying him completely. You know what? Every time I came to my mom to ask her something, she used to say these famous words, speak to your dad. Even later on when we, like even the last couple of years, I would ring my mum to talk to her, and my dad was still alive, and she would answer the phone, hi honey, how are you? We're talking, like, here's your dad. I said, Mum, I want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to Dad. She was a real example in her life, in everything she has done. You know why? Because the grace of God was upon her life. The grace of God was upon her life. He was an imperfect husband, imperfect mother. Let me say, they both had an imperfect faith. When God appeared to Abraham in 17:17 and told him that Sarah will have a child, listen what the Bible says in verse number 17. And Abraham fell upon his face and laughed and said in his heart, shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old? Let me ask you a question. Have you ever laughed so hard that you fell off the chair? That's what happened with Abraham. When God said to him, you're going to have a child, he laughed so hard that he fell off his chair. Now, you say Abraham laughed. Look at Sarah in chapter 18 and verse 12. When she heard the news also in chapter 18 verse 12 says, therefore Sarah laughed within herself. Now she didn't laugh that hard. She didn't fell off the chair. But she laughed within herself, saying, after I am waxed old, shall I have a pleasure, my Lord, being old also? And the Lord said unto Abraham, wherefore did Sarah laugh? Saying, shall I surely bear a child which am old? Is there anything too hard for the Lord? Now Sarah laughed, and then when the angel came and said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? You know what Sarah said? She even lied. He said, I didn't laugh. Who are you lying to? And the angel of the Lord said, yes, you did. You did laugh. They had an imperfect faith. But don't be too quick to judge them, huh? Because we all have that imperfect faith in our lives one time or another. We all are fearful one time or another. I remember when I went to do the stents, and I'm lying there in hospital, and I've never ever been to hospital before. And they were getting ready to put the stents in. And the nurse came to me, and she's talking to me and everything, like checking the blood pressure and the heart rate. And she looked at me and she said, are you nervous? And I looked at her and said, I would be lying if I say no. She said, yes, I know, because I could see your heart rate is so high. I said, what's the use of lying to her? She knows anyway. So what's the use of lying to God? If you have an imperfect faith, tell Him, Lord, I have an imperfect faith. Increase my faith. They had an imperfect faith. Imperfect husband with an imperfect wife, with an imperfect faith. But praise God, they had a perfect Savior. They had a perfect God. Listen to me, please. If you don't get anything out of the message this morning, I want you to get this. God's promises are greater than our faith. God's promises are greater than our faith. We can fail and come short in our faith, But that does not stop God fulfilling His promises in our lives. Abraham, you can laugh as much as you want. Sarah, you can laugh as much as you want and you can lie as much as you want. But around this time next year, you're going to have a child and you're going to call his name Isaac. That's my promise to you. And whether you believe it or not, I'm going to fulfill it. God's promises are greater than our faith. I want to end with this. Genesis chapter 21. Genesis chapter 21. Verses 5 and 6. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. Notice verse 6. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh. God hath made me to laugh. Now, this time, it's not the laugh of unbelief, but rather it's the joy of God fulfilling His promise in her life. She said, God had made me to laugh so that all that hear will laugh with me also. You know what that means? That means that when we hear what God has done, we rejoice with Sarah and Abraham, for God is fulfilling His promises in their lives. And when God fulfills a promise in your life, you ought to laugh also, rejoice. Because God always fulfills His promises. Although it's an imperfect husband or imperfect wife with an imperfect faith, but praise God, they have a perfect God who is able to fulfill His promises to the dot.